Hi, and welcome to this webinar on operational planning systems and how COVID-19 has really shown that consolidation of operational planning systems is a key driver for efficient planning in airports today. So over the last, well, soon a year and a half, COVID-19 has really wreaked havoc in airports, and especially with airport schedules. Traffic schedules are very volatile, and what this has revealed is really a challenge around the often kind of disconnected nature of planning solutions that we see in airports today. So where you don't have a consolidated solution, that's really challenging to operate an airport in the planning space in the current environment. So what are we going to look at here? We're going to look at new traffic patterns. We're going to look at less value from historic data. The volatility is high in the traffic schedule. That is a fact right now, and that's something that we expect to continue for the foreseeable future. And there's a lot of changes in regulation and a lot of changes in the airport operations. So really, there is a need to have an automated and streamlined operational planning process. So what I'll go through in this webinar is I'll exemplify through 4 elements the road to really getting a planning system consolidation. And at the end, really have this kind of do-it-yourself guide, top lines only. Here's how you can get to a place where you have a much better planning solution available to you in the airports. So let me go through a couple of examples of what we mean when we say non-consolidated planning solutions. First one is security checkpoint planning. So one of the first steps in this planning process is to come up with a load factor forecast. And these examples, by the way, are anonymized examples, but they are from airports that we've been working with and are still working with. So you could have one solution for your load factor forecast that's then integrated to, in this case, 2 solutions that jointly then with the first solution will produce an arrival curve. And now this airport will know, well, when are passengers going to arrive at the checkpoint? That then needs to be converted into lanes, and that's where the chain breaks. There's no integration. It's all happening in Excel. So in Excel, manually pulling out the arrival curves and having made a kind of crude homemade way to come up with a lane opening plan. And that lane opening plan is then again a key input parameter to the staffing, but again, here's a broken chain, there's no integration, and it's a 4th solution which is used for the staff planning piece. That overall is quite the challenge and really quite manual to go through this process. Another element that we've seen is the need to do scenario planning. So in this case, it's a resource management system, and looking at, well, in this airport, there's a traffic schedule for the short term, 7 days out. That's in solution 1. Within solution 1, there's also a daily planning functionality, and that's fully integrated and that runs, but only for the next 7 days. Now, with what's happening right now, there's a need in this airport to really look more than 7 days ahead. That traffic schedules come from a second solution, which is not integrated to the first solution. So now again, a broken link, and things are starting to get a little bit tricky here. Where it then becomes even more tricky in this case is, well, the daily planning part and the scenario planning part, even though it's part of the same solution, is actually not integrated. So those are 2 standalone elements with all the challenges that poses. The last example is one of slot allocation. So an airport will get in their slot request through an email, through Excel, through SSIM files. That will then manually be put into 2 different solutions in a first step of a capacity evaluation, and those 2 solutions are not integrated. And then there is a second step to further evaluate the capacity, which again is not integrated and is done in Excel. And then the last element is the reply back to the airlines in mail, Excel, or SSIM format. Again, all of this is a highly manual process, and when it was done twice a year, that could be accepted. When it has to be done every week, well, this simply is not a feasible solution. So if we then look at a kind of a typical solution infrastructure layout in an airport, and we overlay this on kind of the airport process as depicted here by the airport horseshoe. Could be that you have one solution to look at your kind of surface access on passenger arrival, car parking, and curbside. second solution to look at check-in, maybe a third and a fourth solution to look at your baggage operation. You could then have Excel to do kind of your SI terminal and security, while having a fifth solution for the border process, maybe a bit of use of a solution two from check-in, and then a sixth solution to look at the kind of aircraft flow, standing gate and taxiways. And then you may do your de-icing operation in Excel, and you could have a seventh solution to look at your runway. And then you could have an eighth solution to look at your inbound baggage, because that potentially differs from your outbound baggage. And there could be areas where you actually do not have a solution. And again, oftentimes when you do not have a solution, the first step you can do, which is better than nothing, is Excel. So why are airports having all these non-consolidated solutions? Well, there's no one answer, but these are kind of four of the main elements that we see in the work that we would do with airports. First, in the past, solutions have not been available. There has been and continue to be a good development of new solutions into the market that can really help mitigate some of the challenges that have been there in the past. It's been a kind of historic piecemeal addition. So maybe you got one solution for one area, another one for another area. And if it's been done in kind of single departments, it's all kind of just been piecemealed on top of each other. Another issue, and I think this is a key one, it's been a siloed approach. So one team may have said, well, I need a solution for this. And another team said, well, I need a solution to that. They didn't necessarily speak together. Maybe they could have found a common solution to help both of them, but that didn't happen. And then lack of budget. This will be an investment. It's definitely going to pay off, but maybe in a year, lack of budget, it's easier to have in-house resources develop something in Excel. Not very scalable, not robust at all, but it may do the job for a couple of years. So what's the impact of this? Well, manual processes. I think that's the number one key thing that we see right now is all these kind of non-consolidated system just requires a large manual effort. It's poor communication. I'll do one thing in one solution, my colleague will do another thing in another solution. How do we communicate around that? That's also a challenge. If everything is within the same solution, communication is easier. Inaccurate results. It's very easy to know that 2 + 2 is not 5. It's a lot harder in an airport operation to know whether it's actually an inaccurate result before things play out. So that's another challenge. And then lost opportunities for improvement because you don't see it, because everything is a manual process running towards kind of getting that plan out the door. The moment it's out the door, you got to start all over. If everything was seamlessly integrated and running, you would have much more time to look for opportunities for improvement. So what's going to be the benefits of having a consolidated solution? Well, it's definitely going to be way faster, and you can also run various different plans with a much higher frequency, which is required in the current operational environment. The planning quality is going to increase. You're going to be more transparent on your input parameters. You can do more analysis on your input parameters because once you put it into the solution, it will more or less automatically produce the plans. You have a single platform for communication. So now everybody can go into the same solution and look at the same results instead of having a siloed approach with various different Excel documents and legacy solutions. And then you can cover all areas. Now everything is within one. You have the ability to cover everything. So how do we get there? 4 steps. Step 1, look at your current state. Understand what am I actually doing today across the entirety of my planning scheme in the airport. Then organizational alignment. This one is key. You have to internally agree what is it that we're going to do, and that will require some blood and some sweat and some tears maybe to get alignment on how we're going to actually do this. Requirements, getting the requirements in place, and then lastly, the procurement. How are you actually going to procure the right solution in the market? So let's look at current state first. Our recommendation here is to say, okay, look at what are the current solutions you have, what are they currently delivering, and what kind of responsibilities do you have in your organization around these 3 elements. Identify gaps. So gaps to what? Well, gaps to best practice. So you got to have an understanding of, well, where would we actually want to be? Okay, right now we're here. We would like to go here. What are the gaps? And then look at what are the options for improvement. Maybe you cannot get to the end right away. but you've got to have a vision and a plan for, okay, how do I get there? And most importantly, whatever you invest in terms of a consolidated solution, you want to make sure that they are with you on that journey, that they can't just give you the first step, but they can give you all the steps to best practice. So data, that's really one of the key elements. We have so much data. As part of that current state assessment, look at what is out there today. So what data exists, validate it, and look at the pain points. Then start to identify opportunities. Okay, what could I do with this? Boarding card scans, a good example. Airports are collecting a ton of data through the boarding card scans. Some are using that very actively to produce accurate forecasts. Others are just storing it. Then you need to prioritize, because there's so many things you want to do once you start kind of going through this process. So you need to understand, okay, what areas to focus on, what capabilities to focus on, where is my pain point again? And then looking at automation, but also adjusting processes. Again, this is the organizational alignment. Who needs to move where to make this a success? And then ultimately optimize. So an example of this could be an overview like this, where to the left, we have a number of different areas. So flow areas, check-in, baggage handling, security, border, standing gate, and retail. Now, assume you did this assessment, or you had somebody from outside help you do it. Could be on 4 dimensions. Readiness, how ready would this area be for change, be for something new? Data quality and accessibility. What data exists? What's the quality of that data? Can I access it? Is it all stored for me in a nice data warehouse? Is it in a data lake? Is it in a data pond? Or is it just not anywhere for me? I have to dig it up somewhere. Then look at the systems. What kind of systems are in there? Is it a legacy system? Is it Excel? Is it brand new? Is it kind of cloud-based, continuously updated software as a service? Where are we on this scale? And then the value created. So what kind of value is driven from the systems and the data that is there today? And what is kind of the value that could be the output if you had the right solution? Second element, the organizational alignment. Now, it's about ownership, and the challenge, and this is the challenge that many airports are running in again and again and again, is who's going to own this, because it is a consolidated solution, and it will go across a baggage department and a passenger department and a traffic department, and who's going to tie all that together and say, well, you're all going to use the same solution, because that just as a whole holistically makes a ton of sense for our airport. So you need to make that alignment, and you cannot forget change management. That is one of the key elements in this. You've got to make sure that you address change and that you make everybody in the organization understand what's in it for them to make that change. So standard organizational layout, that's where we start. So an example of uncoordinated, right? We have a CFO who has a strategy department and a COO who has a passenger services department. They may together be talking about one solution for their needs. Then we have a finance team who may be talking to baggage about a solution. That's just a second solution. And then we may have a security team who's talking to the digital team who's under the CIO about a third solution. And then the CIO may have a PMO office who's talking about a fourth solution. While if we looked at this in a consolidated way, well, a single solution potentially could solve all these needs. So what if we put all these together in a room and actually had them talk together and find out, oh, I need this as well. Well, so do I. It's going to be much more efficient. Then there's the collaboration piece, and we've shown this on other webinars as well, but it's key. Willingness and criticality. How important is a stakeholder for this to happen, and what are their willingness? The management level, well, they're definitely critical to make this happen, but maybe they don't see the absolute burning platform for a consolidated planning solution. Maybe there are a ton of other priorities, so they need to be influenced. They can be influenced by the planning team in the airport who will say, look, this is really the key for us to produce accurate results. That's the only thing that will drive us to greatness in the future. And then you have the IT department, and the IT department may also be a little bit like, well, we may be willing to move. Are they part of it? Are they not part of it? It also depends on, well, where are we going here? As airports are moving more and more towards kind of software as a service, cloud-hosted solutions, the role of IT changes. It's going to be more about, well, how can I have this external API and that external API to talk together so that we can we can handshake and get data flowing. It's not so much about kind of server racks and the core infrastructure. Requirements. So define the scope. Maybe the scope becomes this big and you say, well, we need a phased approach. It's absolutely fine, but you want to make sure here's where we start, here's where we end. If you only look at phase one, you could easily select the wrong solution that you cannot grow with. Then it's about harvesting the business needs. So again, if you've been through element 1 and element 2, you have a very good understanding of this, but now you have to do the prioritization. And then you got to go to the market. So you want to understand, well, what is actually out there? You can run an RFI process. You can get information. You can understand, okay, that's what's out there. That may help shape up your requirements. And then it's about the documentation of the requirements. And our recommendation is to do an outcome-based approach. So look more of, well, what is it you want to achieve, and less on, today I'm able to do exactly that, so I want a system to mirror image exactly what I do today. That's not necessarily going to drive you forward. Of course, it's always about striking the right balance, but certain elements can actually be solved in potentially different ways, but give you the same outcome. So again, just looking at the airport horseshoe, this could be a phased approach. You could say, okay, phase one, let me look at the kind of the departure process, but also immigration, because immigration is a big element for me, so I want to include that as well. Phase two could then be, okay, let me add on the arrival process. Phase three could then say, okay, let me tackle the aircraft flow. And then phase four, let me look at the roadway and car parking and all of those. And actually, the taxi ranks and the outbound surface access is simply not in scope of this project. And then it's about securing the alignment in the organization. So who is responsible, who is participating, and who will be informed of what's going on. Same structure as before. So now PMO, we've said, okay, we've agreed that it's the PMO office or under the CIO who's going to be responsible for making this happen. Passenger services, baggage, and security will be very much involved as a participant, because they're at the end of the day the business users. So they're the business users. The PMO is the support that will make this happen. And then you could have a strategy team, a finance team, and a digital team, which will all be informed as this project develops. Now, we talked about going to market and using an RFI in an active way. So the way we look at it is define use cases. Find out what are your pain points, how are you going to address those. Find some that are from a theoretical, kind of mathematical, algorithmic standpoint different. So don't take 3 allocation problems, take maybe an allocation problem and a demand optimization problem and a forecasting problem, so that you can understand, okay, what can this solution do for me? So again, using the horseshoe, one use case could be demand-driven check-in allocation. You want to make sure that the solution you get can take a passenger flow and understand, well, how many counters do I actually need to allocate to match that passenger flow? So that is not a kind of more simplistic business rule based where you're like, well, 4 counters, say 2 hours to 30 minutes before, but actually driven by demand. Then it could be real-time planning and immigration. Well, you want to have that immigration process running in real time. The tools should be able to do that. It could be once you look at your standing gate process and really wanting to drive up your contact gate usage. What is the impact of towing and busing on that? How do you address such an element? And then it could be more of longer term capacity planning for my baggage reclaim area. Can the solution help me do that as well? So again, different time horizons, different planning challenges. Make sure that you really get a broad spectrum here, and have vendors come in and demonstrate this to you. That's the best way to do it. Is here's data from your airport, vendor X, Y, Z. Please show me how you would solve these challenges with this data. So now you're in a position to say, okay, I've asked my airport internally, I've asked the market, how do I then document the requirements? So start with that as is. And why is as is important? Because of the change element. If you don't know where you start, it's very hard to kind of inform the change that needs to happen. So have the planning processes documented, the stakeholders, the data, and the systems, and then the value you're currently creating. With that in hand, you then start having the aspirational workshops and say, okay, where is it we want to go? How does that go up against the strategy of the airport. What are the success metrics? What is it that you ultimately want to achieve by having a better solution? The change management part, what is it that we need to change? Again, and this is the trade-off. How much are we going to change? How much is the solution going to change with us? And it's not kind of either or, it's a joint process. And then the implementation plan. So how fast should this happen? Is it going to happen in phases, or are we going to do it in one big bang? And then cloud versus on-premise. Of course, this becomes more of a technical discussion, but there are pros and cons of each. We're seeing more and more airports move towards the cloud, towards the software as a service approach, where you're consistently getting new features into your system, which will keep you up to date and keep you at that aspirational level. So then the to be, what is the future going to look like? What is that planning process going to look like in the future? The stakeholders, will new stakeholders be involved? Is it going to be the same stakeholder community? You can, with new solutions, suddenly share things a lot more flexible than you could in the past. Is that going to have more stakeholder engagement? And then look, of course, comparing, okay, this is the data we have today, this is the data that we will get, how are we going to use that? How's the value we create from that? And how is it going to simplify our solution landscape? So now you know what it is you want. So now you're going to go out and buy it. We're not procurement experts, so that process in it, we'll leave it to you. But again, have vendors come in and demonstrate what they can do. One thing is to actually say, well, tick off boxes in a requirement specification. A whole other thing is demonstrating it in real life. Can you actually do this? It will keep the responses more honest if you ask for vendors to actually demonstrate what they have said they can do. And then potentially put in a short-term trial. Have one or two vendors up against each other for a 30-day period with some expected use cases, and say, okay, what can you do? And can you actually do what you said in your reply you can do? So coming back for the last time today to the airport horseshoe, and just looking at how our thinking is here at Copenhagen Optimization. So we have our better forecast solution that really informs the whole passenger and baggage flow in the airport. Then we have, as part of the Better Airport, a demand module, which really looks at some of the, I would say, non-core functions of the airport. Then we have a solution for car parking, where we can look at what's going to happen at the car parks. Then we have our check-in solution, looking at passenger flow into check-in, baggage flow into check-in, and the allocation. How is that going to play out? We have the entirety of the Better Baggage product, which really looks at outbound as well as inbound baggage from a planning perspective. Our security solution, we have a solution addressing the retail area. How should we staff in the retail? How should we do digital advertising towards the right number of passengers? How are we going to make sure that our concessionaires have the right, say, nationality or language capabilities in place as passengers are moving through? And we have the whole standing gate process. So where aircraft being parked, who's going to be bussed, who's going to be towed, module for de-icing and for runways. And then we have the border solution, which really kind of goes hand in hand also with the security, especially in any kind of transfer product. And then we have the better demand going outbound and one for taxi. So again, this goes to show, well, these are all the kind of piecemeals that you may have today in various different shapes and form. What we have in Better Airport is now everything is actually within the same solution. It doesn't mean you have to take the whole solution. It could be phased. It could be that you're only focused on one area. But this is what we talk about when we talk about a consolidated planning solution. So how do you do this? Well, talk through it. First, you got to understand your current state. Do those assessments. Do not underestimate the importance of that. Then you have the organizational alignment, which is really informed from step one about the accurate understanding of current state. And then the requirements to secure the to-be process. Where is it you want to move? And once you know where you want to go to, these are the requirements. And then really having what we would call kind of an agile procurement process, being like as open as possible, and then potentially having this this short-term trial included to really keep your vendors honest and make sure you get what you're actually asking for. Hopefully this has been useful. You're always welcome to get in touch, and have a good day.